Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today we're talking about Playboy, but we are talking about the dark side of Playboy. Now, I was a big Girls Next Door fan when I was a child, which is why I have like some weird special interest in Playboy and kind of everything early 2000s Y2K. So I thought I'd make a video on some of the weird rules and regulations and habits of Hugh Hefner, because that man was kind of a freak. Let's be real. He was very, very strange. I didn't really notice it as much when I was a kid, but now that I'm older, I'm like, oh my God, that guy was weird. So Hugh Hefner is obviously the founder of Playboy. He founded the magazine in 1953, but I'm sure he was working on it before then, but that's when the first issue of Playboy was actually released. And he had worked on a couple of other magazines before starting his own. He had worked for Esquire, he had a college degree, he had already published multiple things. So he was pretty educated on publication and kind of knew what he had to do to become popular. The first ever publication of Playboy had Marilyn Monroe on the front cover, and this was taken from like a calendar shoot rather than them shooting it themselves. And it wasn't like super risque, it was kind of risque, but not really because it was the 1950s. So she was the first one to ever be featured on the magazine, and this made Playboy actually skyrocket into popularity, because it was kind of one of the first of its kind. There was a couple of other magazines that were kind of branching out into this subsection, but most of them were not. So it was very unique for its time. Initially, Playboy was actually mostly articles, which is kind of funny to think about because most people associate Playboy with naked women. Most of it was actually articles about different social and political topics and commentary. So a lot of Playboy actually helped start different movements, and it was actually a very feminist magazine back then, which was kind of unique for its time. It was talking about a lot of topics that most people wouldn't talk about in the 1950s. And there was a lot of fiction writers who would get published in Playboy as well. And people would read the stories in Playboy and then they would want to go check out the books. So it was a very like mutual relationship between authors and the magazine. And then it wasn't until the early 2000s where suddenly the magazine had to take a shift into something different, because Playboy was actually losing popularity in the late 90s. A lot of people weren't reading it anymore, and there was too much competition with other magazines like Penthouse, who were a bit more extreme in how much nudity they showed. So that is when Playboy became the iconic Y2K Playboy, where it's just mostly naked women, very graphic compared to the old Playboy that was more like lingerie and like classy sort of nudity. But that is how it came to be as Playboy. Because Playboy was losing so much popularity in the late 90s / like very early 2000s, they knew they had to do something to kind of step it up and do something fresh. What they ended up doing is creating a reality show called Girls Next Door in 2005. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard about this, but it follows Hugh Hefner and his three main girlfriends, Kendra, Bridget, and Holly. It pretty much just follows them in their daily life, and it's supposed to be very glamorous and very fun, but it does have a lot of revealing moments on what might be the darker side of Hugh Hefner. So we're gonna get into that now, the very interesting stuff. So like I said before, I was a huge fan of Girls Next Door when I was a child. I've seen all of it. I rewatched it recently actually, so I kind of have a fresh perspective on this one. And one of the things I noticed was the many ridiculous rules and regulations of being a girlfriend or just being a playmate when you're trying to satisfy Hugh Hefner. There's this episode, and it's season 1, episode 4, if you want to check it out. But it shows Bridget, Kendra, and Holly going to Vegas to celebrate their fellow playmate's birthday, Carmela. And so they go there for the day. But the weirdest part about this entire thing is that they have a curfew. And this is a well-known fact about Playboy, is that they have a curfew that they must be home by 9 p.m. unless they're out with Hugh Hefner, which that rule would make me literally never want to live in that house because I don't like it when people tell me when to go to bed, especially an old man. So yeah, that rule is absolutely absurd. And that rule is actually shown in season 1, episode 4, because when they're in Vegas, you see Holly having to keep track of the time the entire time. Here, I'll show a clip of her keeping track of the time.
I'm definitely in charge of keeping my eye on the clock and making sure we were on schedule. Kendra ain't gonna do it.
So she's having to check her watch multiple times, which she had to do this for many events because Hugh wanted them to come back as early as possible. He even jokes in a scene that they should come back by 6 p.m., which having to fly out to Vegas in just a singular day and go from like 4 a.m. to 6 p.m. would be absolutely ridiculous. You can't expect them to get home that early. But the funny part about this episode is they show them having a blast the entire time until you see that they realize that they have to go home. And Kendra specifically really does not want to go home and she hates the curfew. I'll also show a little bit of a clip for this one.
This sucks, you know? I just wish it would be like 10 o'clock, please.
Kendra's super bummed that she can't stay in Vegas and Holly's having to kind of rush them out the door to try to get them home in time. And we actually see Hugh Hefner keeping track of Holly throughout the day. They talk on the phone multiple times because he wants to know kind of exactly what she's doing, but it's just funny that the show makes it seem like she's just really missing her puffin. That's what she used to call Hugh Hefner. And all the other girls are kind of acting like they're also missing Hugh Hefner, which is so weird. I know they didn't miss that crusty man. I just know it. Like, the show had to pretend like it was their idea to go home so early and how they love spending time with him. But those girls would have wanted to stay in Vegas for days, even weeks, just to get away from him. But the curfew was used as pretty much a means to control wherever they were and whatever they did. And one of the main reasons for this curfew is he was afraid that if they went like late night clubbing without him, they would get boyfriends on the side. That was another one of his crazy rules, was no having any other romantic interest. You're not allowed a boyfriend, you're not allowed anything. Like, you had to be strictly monogamous to him, which is funny because he sleeps with 5 billion other women aside from his 3 main girlfriends. So I think that rule was super absurd. And another thing that I noticed is because of this curfew, he had them also follow his bedtime routine, which most of the time is going to bed super early because he's like almost 80 at that point in the show. And then it's also movie night, and they do a lot of movie nights, and you could tell that the girls are extremely bored during these movie nights because most of the time he's just showing home videos that he made himself or really old movies from like early film, like black and white type of talkies. They are just so bored during these movies. It's kind of hilarious to me watching them and thinking like, Kendra was 18 years old at the time. She's not going to want to watch that. She probably wanted to watch like some basketball or something on the TV. I highly doubt he'll ever let them choose any of their movies, to be honest. To dive deeper into some of the ridiculous rules of Hugh Hefner, he had a lot, and I mean a lot, of rules for their appearance, mainly with the main girlfriends. But also he was very particular with playmates, but I felt like their rules were a little less strict for some reason. Like, he let brunettes and different people be a playmate, but when it came to his girlfriends, he was very particular. And one of those things that he was super particular on was that they were not allowed to wear red lipstick at all. And this is something that specifically annoyed his girlfriend Holly Madison the most because she loves a good red lip. And I think Holly looks amazing in a red lip. I think that I love the whole like Hollywood glam on Holly, and that's kind of her whole persona. The fact that she couldn't wear a red lip like the entire time that she was dating him makes me mad for her because I'm also a big fan of a red lip. But she did say in her memoir, Down the Rabbit Hole, that she came down in red lipstick one day because she was kind of feeling rebellious. And then Hugh looked at her and said, "You look like a cheap whore, take that off right now." And so she had to take it all off, and she said that she couldn't wear red lipstick ever again after that point because it was just very, very traumatizing to have him talk to her like that. And she kind of talks more in her memoir about how the red lipstick thing kind of goes along with the fact that he wanted all of his playmates to wear very minimal makeup and be very like fresh and youthful and light. But it really comes down to the fact that he thought that red lipstick made them look old, and that was his biggest problem with it, is that he wanted them to look really, really young. So they were only allowed to wear like pinky blush or like a pink lip and lipstick, kind of like what I'm wearing now. I kind of did this makeup look so that I could show you kind of how he wanted them to look. Is he wanted to look really, really youthful, which is just a big sign that he was a massive creeper, because why don't you want them to look old? You're an old man, so you should want your girlfriend to look maybe a little mature and not so junior high school girl. That's why he didn't like a red lip, and that's why Holly and Kendra and Bridget were never ever allowed to wear one. Another insane rule that he had for all of his girlfriends is they had to have platinum blonde hair. And you'll notice this when you watch the Girls Next Door episodes, because they all have this like incredibly light hair to the point where I'm not even sure how you achieve that level of toning. That is like the top level of platinum, and their hair literally must be fried, but they were always wearing extensions, so I don't know like what the actual state of their hair was. But yeah, I'll put up a picture of Hugh Hefner's girlfriends. This is excluding Barbie Benson, because Barbie is one of the few that didn't have that platinum blonde hair, but I feel like he grew tired of her being brunette. So I guess he was like, oh, let me get a bunch of these little blonde bitches. He also wanted them to kind of wear the same attire and kind of match each other. So when they would go on nights out, you could tell that they kind of all are wearing a similar color scheme or a similar type of dress. And if you were wearing something that he didn't like, he would just send you back upstairs to change, which was kind of crazy. And he also would send them to a makeup artist and a hairstylist and pretty much control their entire look for that night, which means that they really didn't get a lot of opportunities to dress themselves, which I think is a shame, because I think if they did have a bit more freedom in how they dressed, I think that we could have seen a lot of really interesting looks from Holly and Bridget and Kendra, specifically Bridget, because I love her looks throughout the entire show. She has a lot of fun like theme stuff. Like if you see this Christmas outfit here, I thought her looks were adorable. I do think that she had some freedom, but when it came to nights out, they really had to dress in a very specific cocktail attire. Something I also noticed that's really creepy about the appearances of the girls is that he tends to give special treatment to Kendra specifically because of how youthful she looks in the series. And I feel like he gives less attention to Bridget because she was the oldest one. I honestly was surprised at her being the oldest because she doesn't really look that different in age to Holly, but yeah, she was one of the oldest, so she got the least amount of attention. And then we have Kendra, who was freshly 18 on the show, and he gave her a bunch of special treatment. Like he would let her break curfew a lot. So if she asked him like, oh, can we maybe stay out a couple more hours, he would actually listen to her. And I think it's because she did have such a youthful appearance, and he kind of valued that youth over everything else. So even though Holly was his main girlfriend, he essentially favorited Kendra because of that, which is just another reason why Hugh Hefner was like the creepiest man alive, because what are you doing dating an 18-year-old? And why is that 18-year-old's mother letting her live at the Playboy mansion? That I will never understand about Kendra. Now we are moving on to one of the creepiest aspects about this whole thing, which is the intimacy routines of Hugh Hefner. Now I'm trying not to get super graphic with this point of the video because there's so many graphic things I can say about this, but I'm gonna try to maybe censor myself a little bit. This is mainly pulled from Holly Madison's memoir, and also there's a memoir by someone who wasn't necessarily a playmate or one of the girlfriends. It was just someone who came over to the mansion a lot and was like pretty much just joining in on things without actually being a part of it, and her name was Jillian, and she made a memoir, which I don't know exactly how factual a lot of this is, but it kind of lines up with some of the things that the other playmates have said, so I'm going to choose to somewhat believe most of it. In her memoir, Jillian Upstairs, she reveals that she was frequently a guest at the mansion for the going out nights. Multiple nights a week, they would go out to a club and they would party and have a lot of fun. And then Hugh would pick out really, really hot girls, like whoever he thought was hottest in the club, and they would bring them home to come together for a little get together in the bedroom, if you know what I mean. And Jillian revealed that this girl would just be picked at random and then they would be added to the bunch. But the scariest part about this whole thing is that none of these girls were being screened for STIs, which is absolutely horrifying to think about because you're just taking all these random people and you already are mixing them with all these random playmates, and then you add in the main girlfriends to the bunch, and it's just a whole lot of people who are not being tested regularly, which is extremely unsafe, especially based on the fact that it was revealed that Hugh Hefner did not use any protection whatsoever. Ew. Horrifying, I know. One of the routines that they would do during these get-togethers is he would have the girls line up and then one by one they would sleep with him. I don't even want to know how much Viagra this guy had to take to have a long line of like 13 women sleeping with him. But just the fact that you're having to go up after maybe 10 other women have done that is absolutely disturbing to me, especially as someone with contamination OCD. That just triggers my brain on a whole other level. But yeah, that's what he had them do, which disgusting. Holly Madison also has a really, really great podcast if you want to check it out, which is called Girls Next Level. She does this with Bridget and they talk about their time during the mansion together. And one of the things that she said that I found really interesting is she said that Hugh Hefner only used baby oil as lube, nothing else. He refused to use coconut oil, just a regular friggin' Astroglide, I don't know, whatever you want to use. He refused to use any of that, and he would exclusively use baby oil. And the problem with using baby oil that often instead of other things, especially something water-based, is that the girls were getting constant yeast infections and UTIs. And they said that pretty much every couple of weeks they were having to treat these infections because the baby oil was so irritating and it threw off their pH balance to the point where they were pretty much having to be on antibiotics all the time. So that combined with the STIs that they were probably getting from having a bunch of random people in the bedroom is just a disgusting and very unsafe combo to have, especially in that sort of environment. And you just know that Hugh Hefner really didn't care at all. He probably just sent them to the doctor over and over again and was like, okay, go pick up the antibiotics again. So that's one of the most disturbing parts of it all for me, I think, is just how much danger he put these girls in, because they're already in a very uncomfortable situation, and the fact that you're not even being safe and taking precautions is just really, really scary to me. And I think that's one of the most evil things about him, is he truly didn't care about anybody but himself. Another very interesting thing that Jillian said was that a lot of times girls would come into the bedroom, including herself, for the first time, and they wouldn't really know what to expect. And so they would wonder, like, do I have to sleep with Hugh himself? Like, am I going to sleep with the other girls? Like, nobody really knew what sort of situation they were getting themselves into, aside from ones who had already been in the bedroom previously for those nights. And so she said that the first time she went there, she was extremely nervous because she didn't actually want to sleep with Hugh, but she knew that if she joined in, it would give her a better chance of becoming a playmate, which Jillian never ended up becoming a playmate, which is a shame, to put so much effort into trying to become one and then you just never become one. Like, the fact that she had to do so many creepy things just to try to become a playmate and not once was she featured in the magazine is just really sad to me. But she said that she was so nervous the first time. There was another playmate in there who was trying to comfort her. And she essentially said that if you were doing intimate things with the other girls and you seemed super, super into it, that Hugh would just watch and he wouldn't make you sleep with him. And so a lot of the girls would pretend to be really, really into it, and they would actually pretend to do more intimate things with each other. Like, they wouldn't actually do them. They would just pretty much fake it like they were in a movie. and then Hugh would kind of leave them alone. Except for the main girlfriends, they couldn't get out of it. It was essentially their job to really help him every week, multiple times a week. So they couldn't do this, but if you were one of the newer girls, you were able to do this, which is honestly really, really sad to think about, the fact that they thought that the only way they could really get out of the situation was pretending to be intimate with another woman. But I totally understand their thinking, because if I was in that situation, that would probably be a lot easier than having to be with this really disgusting old man that you don't know anything about, aside from the fact that he's disgusting. There was a lot of pressure on these girls to do a lot of these things though, because of the fact that they gained notoriety and wealth and opportunities based on what they could do for Hugh Hefner. The saddest part about it for the three main girlfriends is Hugh never wanted to make them playmates. He actually thought that none of them were photogenic enough to even be in the magazine. The only time that they were able to actually be in the magazine is the time that they were on the front cover, and that's only because Girls Next Door kind of blew up in popularity, and then suddenly Hugh was like, okay, you guys could be playmates. I know it's been your dream forever and I haven't allowed you up until this point, but now that you're making me more money, you could be on the cover. So they did all of that essentially to not be Playboy bunnies. They pretty much did it just because they got an allowance every week and they got to live at the mansion, but I really don't think that they were getting as much as people think they were. I think that they had to put so much disgusting work into it. It just doesn't seem worth it to me at all. I think that I would rather just not do it at all, especially if you weren't even modeling, because what's the point? I mean, sure, you get an allowance, but you're being controlled by an old man who's telling you that you have to be home by 9 p.m. I wouldn't want that. Something that I remember that was really interesting from Holly's memoir, Down the Rabbit Hole, is that she explained that the show Girls Next Door actually really helped her, because she felt like she had more independence away from Hef, because before that point she was constantly just having to do pretty much everything that Hef said, and she felt like she had literally no time to herself and she couldn't focus on any of her own career aspirations. But she said that the Girls Next Door show made it so that she didn't have to do as many disgusting things with him, and she was kind of able to focus on her own career, and that led to Holly actually being able to have her own TV show and have her own podcast and memoir and actually be very popular outside of that. So I think that in a lot of ways the show Girls Next Door helped them more than anything else could have in that situation, because it kind of allowed them to have an exit plan that they wouldn't have previously had. And I don't think any of them would have lasted being in the Playboy Mansion so long if it wasn't for that TV show. And I also think that none of them would have really had the courage to leave as much as they did if they didn't have, so many opportunities from being the girls from Girls Next Door. So I think my biggest takeaway from this is I know that a lot of people think, well, they chose to be there and they were getting all this money and they're just gold diggers, whatever people would say about it. But the fact of the matter is a lot of them were very young. I mean, you have to think about the fact that Kendra was 18 when she came into the house, and she said that she had a very chaotic and messy life. She was really into drugs and things like that. Really bad lifestyle that she was living before she came into the mansion. In a weird way, she said that the mansion helped her kind of find herself and get out of that. But at the same time, the mansion also gave her extreme mental health issues that she talks about frequently today. So it was kind of a win some, lose some. So even though they were gaining a lot of opportunities and a lot of things from being in the mansion, it also took pieces of their soul away, which I know sounds dramatic, but with the amount of mental health issues and trauma that they have discussed after leaving the mansion, you have to think, well, yeah, they were there by choice, but were they just being groomed into thinking it was normal and then left the mansion and suddenly they realized like this was a bad man? Probably. I think that's mostly the case. And I'll always have empathy for these girls, because even though they technically wanted to be there at the time, like they were young. They didn't know what they were doing. They were getting a lot of money. They were getting a lot of exposure. And I think a lot of young girls would fall into that trap, unfortunately. I mean, Playboy's still up today. There's things like OnlyFans that 18-year-olds are making millions of dollars off of. So I don't know. I think that a lot of these young girls are getting groomed into it and they don't really realize it at the time, but most of the time when you get older, you realize that a lot of things that you thought were normal were not normal. So those are my thoughts on Playboy and just kind of some of Hugh Hefner's ridiculous rules and what it really meant to be one of the main girlfriends of Hugh Hefner. Playboy as a whole is very, very fascinating to me, and there's a lot of interesting history. And I think that there's some aspects of Playboy that I think are really cool. I think the beginning publication of it was the start of something really interesting, but I think they went the completely wrong direction with it. And I think that it did a lot more harm than good, unfortunately. So let me know what your guys' thoughts on Playboy are. I know this is a longer video and it took me a while to get out, but I was trying to work really hard to get some interesting research for you guys. I have a lot of interesting video essays planned, including one about PSAs and anti-drug culture in the 90s. So please like and subscribe if you want to see more of my videos. And yeah, you could put the post notifications on as well if you don't want to miss anything. But I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and bye guys.